After the DR event, what do we do? So you've got to take stock, right? And when we say after the DR event, there's two parts to that. There's immediately after we do the failover, immediately after you discover that a disaster has happened. And then there's after the entire event and everything is back to running the way it was. So what we typically see is the customers have their backup server joined to a domain. These malware, ransomware scripts and agents will grab domain admin credentials out of somebody's browser, right? So as a domain administrator or a systems administrator, you may log into a system on your network with domain admin credentials. You may then use that browser to go out onto the web, go to some site that has malicious code on it, and suddenly your domain admin credentials get scraped. That script now knows where you came from, can reverse and follow you back through your IP address, go into your systems and start doing whatever it wants to with those credentials. So knowing that it will try to encrypt your backups, Veeam encrypts your backups by default. So since it can't encrypt them, it just deletes them. Since it has your Windows backup server was joined to a Windows domain and it has domain admin credentials, it can do that, right? It can access your cloud backups and delete those as well. So you have to start assessing the damage. Like, how do I recover? What exactly has been affected? Is it all my systems? Is it servers, is it workstations? Is it multiple locations? Like Steven said a little bit ago, this happens very, very quickly. It's when you hear about people like ripping plugs out of the wall, that's almost what you have to do to stop this from spreading. And by that point, it's probably too late anyway. So Steven, once we've failed over, can you talk us through the failback and what that kind of takes?
Yeah, so first of all, you're going to need to make sure that you have a clean environment to fill back into, because the one thing that you do not want to happen is you schedule the downtime, you work with our team to get you filled back, and you find out, hey, I left this workstation up and it was still infected and it just reinfected my entire environment. So you need to first of all create an inventory of everything in your environment, and you need to make sure that everything is cleaned, even if you have to re-image it. Once everything is clean, then we need to plan the failback. So the failbacks are normally planned. What we suggest is you create a window starting at 5 p.m. on a Friday until 8 a.m. Monday morning. And then what we'll do is we'll actually, when you have a DR event, we follow all of Veeam's best practices, including the 3-2-1 rule. So whenever you spin your servers up here, we back them up into one of our DR backup servers. And then what we do is we actually make you the cloud tenant and we send the backups back down to you. And then you need to schedule time or a failover window to fill back into your production. So like I said, normally 5 p.m. Friday, 8 a.m. Monday, we'll do a final backup here. We'll sync those changes back down to you. And then you restore your VMs into Monday morning. Once we schedule this failback window, we normally don't flip the switch back on to turn your site back on, because then we would have to reschedule it. We first of all need to make sure you have a clean environment. Nothing's going to reinfect the servers we have on our side. Then we're going to need to plan the failback into your infrastructure. And one of the most important things is you need to make sure that you have licensing for your new equipment or licensing for your existing equipment, so that we have the ability to fail you back, make sure everything comes up like normal and everything's working. So after we fail you back, we're going to make sure that your servers are functioning like they're supposed to. And then at that point, we'll go ahead and start the backups again.
Yeah, and it's important to think outside the box and on a broad scale, because if you think of all your employees and all your devices, you could rebuild everything that you have in your building, right? If you have one building, everything's there. You rebuild your servers, you rebuild desktops and things that are there. Here comes Trista with her laptop, hasn't been to the office in a couple of weeks. She works remote, or it's the pandemic or whatever. And she brings this laptop that's still infected because it hasn't been updated, doesn't have new antivirus on it. It hasn't been scanned or cleaned, and it hasn't been rebuilt. She drops that thing back on your network, and guess what happens? Steven gets a call at 5 o'clock in the morning again saying we need to spin everything back up in the DR because the whole thing got infected. So make sure that you're thinking about everything and anything that could potentially touch your environment. So the last thing is the after action report. This is mainly for customers, for end users, and maybe folks that they work with, right? The Dataprize cybersecurity services that we offer, we do have incident response, and it helps with assessments, after the fact. But basically, you go through and identify where you think the situation started. What was the ingress point? What was affected first? How was it infected? Was it a 0-day vulnerability? Was it some other patch? You may have an idea about some of those things by this point. And then you create the assessment. A lot of times, the law enforcement or your cybersecurity insurance people will want that. You may need to file it for those insurance reasons. You may need it for audit, etc. So if you need help with those types of things, we can certainly help you with that. But it's important to make sure you do an assessment, kind of a formal lessons learned, make sure that those things aren't allowed to happen again and you have better control over your environment.